The chronometers in the sub-basement bunker registered the anomaly. A shift of seconds, a blink faster than light. Julian Thorne, the man who owned the concept of time, felt it like a cold breath on the back of his neck, a certainty that when he finally broke the laws of physics, the recoil would break him. It was the whisper of a future he couldn't control. Julian Thorne, now known exclusively as Julian Thorne, stood before the monolithic black glass wall of his private office, 37 stories above the relentless slow-motion ballet of Manhattan. Below him, the city was a vast, sprawling tapestry of human endeavor, yet to Julian, it was merely an inefficient mechanism ticking toward an arbitrary end. He despised the inherent linearity of existence, the insulting, primitive bottleneck that decreed one must experience 1 second at a time. At 35, Julian had already accumulated a fortune so staggering that Billionaire felt like a quaint, understated title. His firm, aethelcorp, didn't just deal in quantum computing. It owned the future of data processing. He'd built his empire not on traditional market models, but on the certainty that information, unfettered by the strictures of time, was the only true currency. He wore his wealth, specifically the perfectly tailored charcoal suit, the only splash of color the glacial blue of his tie, with a weary sort of disdain, as if the trappings of success were merely necessary distractions from his true work. He was the world's first and only chronobillionaire, a title he secretly loathed for its sensationalism but tacitly endorsed for its utility as a shield. Julian's eyes, the color of a glacial melt, were perpetually focused on a point just beyond the present. It was an unnerving trait. His colleagues often joked that he was always looking exactly seconds into the future, a calculation he found less humorous and more accurate than they realized. He wasn't seeking emotional connection. He was seeking causal certainty. To him, the past was just badly organized data, and the future was merely an unwritten algorithm awaiting the correct input. This obsession had birthed projectstasis, a highly classified initiative consuming 90% of Ethel's colossal resources. The goal was simple, yet blasphemous: to develop a method for observing, but not interacting with localized past timelines. Julian wasn't a time traveler in the classic sense. He was a temporal cartographer. He wanted to map the moments that define the present, to harvest the wisdom of history without suffering its consequences. Julian's calculated intensity had alienated most of the world, but it had earned him the unwavering focus necessary to challenge physics. His humor, when it surfaced, was razor-sharp and often directed at the sheer slowness of human conversation and the mediocrity of the present age. He found the concept of patience to be an operational failure. A soft chime signaled the arrival of the only person in the world Julian permitted to interrupt his 3.7-second future view: Dr. Leyla Mbengue. Leyla was the head of Ethel's bioanalytics division, a field she'd been drawn to precisely because it dealt with the beautiful, messy complexity of biological time. Her skin was the shade of polished ebony, a stark and vital contrast to the sterile, monochromatic perfection of Julian's office. Her expression was a careful mask of professional skepticism, always. Where Julian sought conquest, Leyla sought growth and development. She was the humanist counterweight to Julian's cold, intellectual pursuit of mastery over causality. She was the conscience Julian had consciously outsourced. "Julian," she said, her voice a low, steady alto that always sounded like an indictment. "The power consumption spiked by 18% in the last 4 hours. You were supposed to be running a localized data pull on the 2005 municipal bond data, not trying to find the lost city of Atlantis." Julian didn't turn. The 2005 data proved irrelevant. "I shifted the target to a more robust node, the early 21st century equity market. Specifically, the factors influencing the value of a certain fruit-themed technology company. I wanted to understand how Apple stock got so cheap before its meteoric ascent. It's an exercise in informational arbitrage, Leyla, not archaeology." Leyla crossed the polished floor, her eyes fixing on the holographic schematic of the Chronos core hovering above Julian's main console. "Informational arbitrage funded by Billion Julian. And the spike wasn't a consequence of your new target. It was a recoil signature. The system didn't just extract data this time. It pulled something back." Julian finally pivoted, his glacial eyes narrowing. He respected Leyla because she never needed him to explain his own equations back to him. She spoke the language of temporal mechanics as fluently as he did. The temporal harvesting was successful, he admitted. His voice perfectly level. The data stream was richer than expected. But you are correct. There was an anomaly. He waved a hand, and the holographic core dissolved, replaced by a microscopic visualization of a chaotic energy field. It was tiny, barely measurable, yet fundamentally malignant. I've named it the Chronos Contagion, he stated, the name hanging in the air with the weight of an unexploded ordnance. Leyla leaned closer to the display. It's not an energy signature, Julian. It's a localized acceleration of entropy. Look at the decay rate. It's a hyper-focused decay field. Precisely, Julian affirmed, a flicker of cold excitement in his eyes. It's a living paradox. It doesn't destroy matter. It speeds up the process of existence. I ran an initial test. He tapped the console, and a short video clip played. A perfectly ripe banana sat on a sterile lab bench. As the contagion field was applied, the banana didn't just rot. It went from vibrant yellow to bruised brown to mush to dust, all in less than 15 seconds. Leyla recoiled, her professional mask momentarily cracking to reveal genuine shock. You've created a device that literally executes the concept of getting to the point, she said, the intellectual sarcasm returning, sharp and defensive. So, Julian, you've finally achieved your dream, making everyone on Earth die of old age before their first heartbreak. Congratulations. Her dark humor hit its mark, but Julian remained unfazed. The implications are not humorous, Leyla. This is not destruction. It's rapid retirement. Living tissue ages decades in a minute. It is the ultimate weapon, not because it can kill, but because it can unmake the future by accelerating the present into immediate, complete decay. He locked the visualization away with a single, decisive command. It's why I've quarantined the research. If this technology were to go public, humanity would be rendered extinct. We would all be dust before we could decide what to have for breakfast. Leyla finally understood the gravity of what he'd done. The contagion wasn't just fast decay. It was temporal tunnel vision, a forced immediate linearity that rejected all other possibilities. It forced the organism down a single, inescapable path to the finish line, instantly. She was the only person who truly grasped the mechanics of the accident. Their shared brilliance and mutual attraction to this kind of profound danger formed the undeniable, volatile tension that bound them. The moment was shattered by an urgent, low-frequency security alert. The light on Julian's internal console flickered from green to a pulsing amber. Intrusion alert, Julian murmured, his gaze now focusing not 3.7 seconds, but milliseconds ahead. Internal grid compromised. Who's trying to peek at our Apple stock data now? It's not a peek, Julian. It's a breach, Leyla corrected, moving swiftly to her own diagnostic panel. They bypassed the quantum encryption on sublevel B. They're not after the contagion. They wouldn't know it exists. They're after the core temporal harvesting technology itself, a mere prototype of the system, likely. Julian knew who was behind it. Sterlingvance. Vance was Julian's perennial rival, a caricature of Silicon Valley excess, all yacht parties and empty hype, a walking example of a big dreamer who slept on their dreams but still talked a good game. Vance perpetually tried to outmaneuver Ethel, seeking to steal the concept and slap a meaningless, trendy brand name on it. Vance doesn't have the personnel to breach a Tier 5 facility, Julian said, his hand hovering over the master security lockdown. This is a betrayal. Leyla pulled up the security footage of sublevel B. The blurred image of a figure in a black tactical suit was visible, expertly disabling the laser grid. His agents are too sloppy. This person is professional, Julian. Inside information professional. Julian's face, usually a mask of detached intellectualism, tightened with a rare display of fury. He had spent his life eliminating variables, and the one variable he could not stand was disloyalty. The core prototype, the unit, is still in the primary containment chamber. If they get their hands on that, without your calibration, it will be unstable, Leyla finished, her voice flat with dread. The temporal echo it generates won't be localized. It will be unlocalized, uncontained, and potentially catastrophic. They watched in silent horror as the blurred figure successfully extracted the prototype unit, a sleek obsidian black device the size of a briefcase, and vanished into the complex's ventilation system, a ghost of a traitor. Julian didn't look at the screen. He looked at Leyla. Find the mole, Leyla. Now, start with my personal security detail. They're the only ones with that level of systemic access. As Leyla initiated the deep trace, Julian stared back at the black glass, the distant lights of Manhattan sparkling like a billion frozen, unmoving seconds. He had only intended to observe the past, but his ambition had inadvertently pulled a weapon into the present, and now that weapon's genesis had been stolen by a rival fueled by nothing but avarice. His attempt to break time had resulted in his first agonizing lesson. The moment you try to step outside of causality, causality steps back inside of you, usually with a knife. This wasn't a game of data anymore. It was a race against the very fabric of existence, a race he couldn't afford to lose. The linear insult had become a catastrophic threat, and it had all begun with the impossible desire to see yesterday's stock price. The energy spike from the initial temporal pull, which had created the contagion, was still registering on the console, a low, humming blue frequency that wrapped around the room like a tangible threat. Julian and Leyla were now bound by this secret, this catastrophic accident, and the immediate, terrifying certainty that the world they sought to understand was now teetering on the edge of a man-made temporal collapse. Their life had instantly become life's drama, with no rehearsal. Julian slammed his hand on the obsidian desk, a sound usually unthinkable in his environment of perfect quietude. The mole. The mole had to be in the detail. Who was on shift tonight? He demanded, the coldness in his eyes now an active, dangerous frost. His frustration was not about the theft of technology, that could be rebuilt. It was the breach of trust that cut him deeper. Trust was a quantifiable risk he had minimized, and yet, here it was, a variable he had failed to zero out. Leyla's fingers flew across the interface, cycling through access logs and biometric scans. The internal security detail is rotated by quantum-generated random sequence every 48 hours. The agent on the door was Kellen. 10 years of service, 0 flags, impeccable record. But Kellen had access to the override codes for Sub-Level B's magnetic locking system. Impeccable records are often the best masks, Julian countered, pacing the length of the room. Vance isn't smart, but he's excellent at one thing: finding people with a price. Run a financial check on Kellen. Not the visible accounts. Dig into the dark ledgers. I want to see every shadow transaction that man has ever made. Focus on any deposits over the last 6 weeks that could be construed as hazard pay. As Leyla initiated the deep clandestine financial forensics, Julian activated the facility's highest-level defense protocol. Red warning lights, muted to a subtle crimson, began to flash around the edges of the room. He spoke directly into the air. Ethel Security Command, this is Thorne. Level Omega lockdown. No personnel movement outside of pre-approved emergency paths. Activate the magnetic field dampeners on all perimeter exits. The prototype is not to leave the complex. I repeat, the unit is contained. He ended the transmission, knowing the last sentence was a lie, but necessary for maintaining operational control. Kellen's on a flight path, Leyla announced, her voice tight. A privately chartered jet registered to a shell company in the Caymans. The company is listed as a minor subsidiary of Vance Global Ventures. He's taking the prototype offshore. The sheer arrogance of Vance, trying to hide a device capable of unlocalized temporal decay on an island nation, was almost comedic, were the stakes not apocalyptic. Track the jet, Leyla. I want its destination locked. He's not going to the Caymans for a vacation. He's going for a demonstration. Julian looked out at the city, the millions of people unaware that a billionaire's experiment had inadvertently armed a fool with a doomsday device. He had always seen time as a challenge, an intellectual mountain to climb. Now he saw it as a responsibility, a volatile element he had unleashed. The first climax has arrived sooner than expected. Hasn't it? Leyla murmured, her focus still on the tracking display, but her mind calculating the temporal fallout. Julian nodded slowly. The theft of is only the overture. The true threat is the instability. Vance will try to activate it, Leyla. He'll want to impress his buyers. And when he does, without your calibration, it won't just pull data. It will cause a massive unlocalized temporal echo. He knew what that meant. Instead of the targeted decay of a single banana, the prototype would generate a momentary time slip across a massive area, causing small, localized, rapid aging events. A bridge pillar could instantly corrode. A steel beam might dissolve into rust. And worst of all, people would experience rapid, non-fatal, localized aging. A horrifying satirical visual of the relentless decay of life, delivered instantly. "We have to intercept him before he powers it up," Julian declared, retrieving a small, specialized case from a hidden wall safe. Inside lay a highly advanced, customized temporal stabilization unit, a device designed to operate as a benevolent temporal push. This was Ethel's answer to the Chronos Contagion's pull, the counterfrequency that Leyla had theorized. As he closed the case, the ambient energy of the lingering temporal discharge, the faint electric blue light that had been captured in their shared experience of the anomaly, flared briefly around them. It was a tangible reminder of the power they had unleashed and the danger they now faced. They were no longer two brilliant scientists separated by an ethical chasm. They were two co-conspirators against the end of time, bound by a shared, world-changing secret and an immediate, overwhelming need to act. The clock, for the first time in Julian Thorne's calculated life, was truly running out. Julian looked at Leyla, the fierce intelligence and ethical clarity in her eyes grounding him. Vance made a catastrophic error stealing a prototype he doesn't understand. We have to correct our own error in allowing him to take it. Get me the confirmed destination. We move now. The weight of a city's unwitting fate, compressed into the size of a briefcase, rested on the successful execution of their immediate, desperate plan. The chartered jet carrying the traitor Kellen and the stolen P-1 prototype had a confirmed destination, a remote, fortified offshore bunker owned by Vance Global Ventures, situated just outside the $12 international waters boundary off the coast of New Jersey. Sterlingvance, Julian thought with a sneer, was demonstrating a predictable lack of imagination, choosing proximity over true security. He was a man who needed to feel the proximity of the chaos he created. Julian and Leyla were already descending into the specialized hangar deep beneath aethelcorp, an area designed to accommodate Julian's highly customized, hypersonic stealth jet, the Aethelion. The entire facility was now buzzing with a contained, frantic energy, the red lights of the Omega lockdown casting long, urgent shadows. "The prototype is still in a passive state," Leyla reported, strapping into the co-pilot seat of the jet. The Aethelion was less an aircraft and more a pressurized, mobile laboratory. Vance will need at least 15 minutes to run the initialization sequence. He'll want a live data stream to show off his stolen goods to potential buyers. Julian, already running the complex pre-flight diagnostics, gave a dry laugh that held no humor. Vance has the technical acumen of a houseplant, Leyla. He won't be able to distinguish between initialization and catastrophic failure until the failure is already underway. He will activate the system intending to extract market data from the past, the same mistake I made, but his lack of calibration will ensure he doesn't just extract information. He'll cause a rupture in the timeline. He pulled up a highly detailed predictive model on the main display. It showed a localized atmospheric anomaly radiating outward from the coordinates of the Vance bunker. The $text, P_1 prototype, lacking the stabilizing algorithms you designed, will generate an unlocalized temporal echo. It will not be contained. The wave will hit the nearest massive population center capable of dampening the temporal field's energy, Manhattan. Leyla stared at the shimmering, chaotic projections. The effect won't be lethal immediately, will it? No, that's the contagion, which is still locked away. This will be the $text, P_1's default failure mode. A random application of rapid aging events across the city's infrastructure and, horrifically, its inhabitants. A terrifying, satirical visual of the stock market's relentless decay obsession, as I predicted. Julian armed the Aethelion's engines. The jet vibrated with restrained power. We need to lift off now. We might be able to stabilize the atmosphere before the echo fully propagates. But before Julian could initiate the vertical launch, the alarms in the hangar shrieked from red to a terrifying, strobing magenta. "Julian! He's done it!" Leyla shouted, pointing at the display. The predictive model of the atmospheric anomaly instantly morphed into a live data feed of actual temporal chaos. Sterlingvance, in his desperation and haste, had activated the unstable prototype. The ensuing unlocalized temporal echo didn't dissipate in the offshore air. It surged forward, drawn by the dense human and structural mass of the city. In Manhattan, the consequences were immediate and surreal. The feed from Ethel's vast array of city sensors began flooding the cockpit display with nightmarish images. The first structural failure occurred at the base of a support pillar on the Brooklyn Bridge. In an instant, the steel, designed to last centuries, experienced the acceleration of entropy. It didn't explode or collapse. It simply corroded with unnatural speed. The metal went from load-bearing steel to orange dust in the space of 3 seconds, like a time-lapse video of decay sped up 10,000 times. The pillar groaned, and a section of the bridge briefly buckled before emergency algorithms compensated. A few blocks away, on Wall Street, the terrifying, satirical nature of the event played out with chilling precision. A cluster of high-level financial traders stood outside the stock exchange, engrossed in a discussion of quarterly earnings. As the echo washed over them, their expensive suits momentarily appeared to dissolve, their skin turning papery and gray. They aged not unto death, but unto a state of rapid, non-fatal, localized senescence. A 50-year-old executive's face suddenly held the weary, furrowed lines of a man of 80. His hair turned instantly white, and the vigorous debate he was having became a shaky whisper. The decay was immediate and localized, fading back to near normalcy as the wave passed, leaving them horrified, confused, and prematurely aged by decades. A skyscraper window designed to withstand hurricane winds suddenly buckled, its laminated glass turning brittle, dissolving into a fine spray of sand as the silica structure was retired from its solid state. "That's the temporal field's interaction with crystalline structure and high-stress alloys," Leyla analyzed, her voice a mix of terror and professional awe. "The $P_1 prototype is forcing materials to skip immediately to their state of highest entropy. It's not killing the bridge. It's simply informing it that it has already lived out its operational lifespan." Julian, already lifting the Aethelian with a controlled, violent surge of power, felt a cold, knot of guilt twist in his stomach. He had unleashed this absurdity, this mockery of existence. His intellectual quest to conquer time had manifested as a joke in the form of rapidly aging brokers. The echo is diminishing Julian, but the structural damage is widespread. "The wave lasted 30 seconds maximum," Leyla confirmed, her breath catching as they cleared the ceiling of the hangar and sliced into the night sky, banking sharply toward the coast. 30 seconds of uncontained chaos is 30 seconds too many. We need to neutralize the source immediately before Vance tries a second, more powerful ignition, Julian ordered. His focus was absolute. The glacial melt in his eyes was now a raging torrent of intent. Vance's ignorance is a bigger threat than his malice. He has no idea the energy he just released. As they accelerated toward the ocean, Julian initiated the final critical trace on the mole, Kellen. He bypassed the standard security protocols, routing the information through Leyla's bioanalytics interface, a technique only she could manage. "Julian, look at this," Leyla commanded, pulling up Kellen's historical financial data. The hidden ledgers, the dark accounts, revealed nothing overtly suspicious. No massive deposits from Vance, no sudden bursts of cash. Instead, they found a slow, steady stream of large, unmarked micropayments from a series of untraceable shell companies over the last 3 years. "It wasn't a one-time bribe," Julian observed, his voice dangerously low. "It was a long-term investment in a mole. Vance wasn't trying to steal the tech last week. He's been positioning someone for the better part of a decade. He wasn't just after the prototype. He was after Ethel's movements and capabilities, the operating data." The realization hit Julian with the force of an actual blow. His greatest security leak wasn't a last-minute infiltration. It was a deep, calculated internal betrayal. Kellen hadn't been waiting for the $\text on $1 unit. He had been the eyes and ears for Vance, waiting for the moment when Ethel's resources were stretched thin by a sensitive operation. Julian's obsession with the contagion and the temporal harvesting had created the perfect operational window for the rival he despised. He was feeding Vance data on Ethel's movements. Kellen was the ultimate double agent, Leyla confirmed, her face etched with grim determination. He knew precisely when the $text $1 would be vulnerable during the transfer to the deep storage facility. He created the vulnerability. A lifetime of calculated risk, ruined by one unseen human variable, Julian muttered, pushing the Aethelian to its maximum safe velocity. The jet screamed across the water, the New Jersey coastline a rapidly approaching smudge. The severity of the temporal echo, the rapid aging of parts of Manhattan, forced Julian and Leyla to strip away their professional pretense. They were two brilliant minds, facing an existential disaster, functioning as a single, coordinated intelligence. Their shared brilliance, often a source of friction, was now their only asset. The residual temporal field is still active over the city, Leyla warned, adjusting the Aethelian sensor array to track the Vance bunker. If Vance tries to activate the system again, the resulting echo will be exponentially more powerful. The atmosphere is already primed. Julian's focus shifted to the custom briefcase containing the temporal stabilization unit, the counter-frequency device. The stabilization unit must be deployed at the source. It introduces a benevolent temporal push, a perfect cancellation wave that matches the contagion's pull, effectively restoring the natural, albeit inefficient, flow of time. It's the only way to neutralize the $text $1 without simply destroying the mechanism and risking a cascading temporal decay, Leyla agreed. But the calibration must be flawless. If the counter-frequency is even $0.001% off, we risk accelerating the decay instead of canceling it out. They locked eyes across the console, the flickering blue light of the temporal discharge reflecting in their intense gazes. The weight of the moment was immense. Leyla was the only person alive who could execute the calibration, and Julian was the only person capable of getting her into the bunker and creating the diversion necessary for her to work. Vance's bunker is a retired anti-submarine warfare facility, Leyla said, pulling up its schematics. Deep underwater, heavily shielded. Standard entry is impossible. We'll have to use the $text Aethelian's $submersible function and breach the lower maintenance lock. I designed this plane for impossible problems, Julian replied, his voice regaining its cold certainty. The moment of fury had passed, replaced by surgical calculation. The approach will be cloaked. Once inside, Vance will have his own security detail, presumably Kellen and whatever mercenaries he bought with his stock market failures. Kellen will be the biggest threat, Leyla stated, loading 2 non-lethal kinetic disruptors. He knows our protocols, our blind spots, and your tendencies, Julian. He'll anticipate your moves. Good, Julian said, his lips twisting into a rare, grim smile. Then for the first time, I won't move with calculation. I will move with pure instinct. We are not going to sneak in, Leyla. We are going to distract him. The Aethelian transitioned seamlessly into submersible mode, plunging into the dark, cold water miles offshore. The chaos they had caused on land felt distant, yet its terrifying potential was their immediate reality. They had a singular objective: infiltrate the bunker, neutralize the prototype, and stop Sterlingvance from selling the ability to instantly retire the world. Their life had indeed become a high-stakes, unscripted drama, forcing them to act decisively and together. They descended into the cold abyss, their shared catastrophic secret becoming the very foundation of their desperate alliance. The residual blue energy of the temporal anomaly seemed to cling to the Aethelian, an ethereal residue of their failed attempt to break time. As the bunker materialized on the sonar screen, a squat, menacing structure looming in the dark, Julian spoke one last time before initiating the infiltration sequence. Remember, Leyla, I create the noise. You create the silence. The fate of causality rested on a billionaire's erratic instinct and a scientist's precise calibration. The world, utterly oblivious, continued its slow, linear march above them. The Vance bunker, a concrete behemoth encased in the cold, crushing pressure of the deep Atlantic, loomed silent and menacing. The Aethelion, operating in full stealth and submersible mode, adhered to the curved hull of the facility like a remora, its presence registered by nothing but the sophisticated sonar of the two occupants. Julian piloted the craft with an unnerving calm, his movements precise and economical, wasting no energy on anxiety. Leyla, monitoring the internal thermal signatures, guided him toward the lower maintenance lock, a known structural weak point. Thermal scan confirms at least a dozen active life signs inside the primary receiving chamber, Leyla reported, her voice low and steady through the comms. It's a mix of Vance's private security and Kellen's signature. Kellen is guarding the entrance to the central core. He's anticipating our arrival. Julian gave a slight nod, visible only in the faint glow of the console light. Anticipation is the first flaw. Kellen expects us to follow procedure, to try and negotiate or disable the power grid. He expects calculation. He expects me to be Julian Thorne, the chrono-billionaire. Julian armed the maintenance lock breach sequence. He won't be expecting instinct. The Aethelion's specialized drilling arm engaged, emitting a low-frequency sonic pulse that expertly disabled the lock's complex magnetic seals without triggering the pressure alarms. The maintenance chamber flooded with frigid seawater, and Julian and Leyla, already in lightweight, form-fitting dive suits optimized for deep-sea pressure, exited the craft. The temporal stabilization unit, the counter-frequency device, was strapped securely to Leyla's back, its crucial presence a tangible weight. They moved through the flooded corridor with the silence and efficiency of Special Forces operatives, illuminated only by the focused beams of their helmet lamps. The airlock hissed open, and they emerged into a dimly lit dry section of the bunker, the air thick with the smell of ozone and damp concrete. Vance is in the central presentation chamber, 100 meters ahead, Leyla whispered, pointing to a holographic map projected onto her visor. The P1 prototype will be active. I'm picking up a very faint, destabilized temporal field emanating from that area. He's trying to run a diagnostic. He's running an ignition sequence, Julian corrected, gripping the non-lethal kinetic disruptor. He's terrified by the Manhattan Echo and desperate to prove the technology works before his buyers walk away. We move to the main corridor. As they reached the junction, a figure stepped out of the shadow of a recessed utility alcove. It was Kellen. He was no longer the impeccable uniformed security officer of Ethel. He was clad in black tactical gear, his face grim, illuminated by the corridor's emergency lights. He held a high-powered, military-grade energy rifle aimed squarely at Julian's chest. "Mr. Thorne." "Dr. Mbengue," Kellen said, his voice devoid of emotion, a professional betrayal. "I knew you wouldn't let your badly organized data just walk out the door." "Kellen," Julian replied, his voice a cold blade of intellect. 10 years of loyalty for a decade of micropayments. You traded an empire for a trickle of cash. Your price, Kellen, was remarkably cheap." Kellen's jaw tightened. "My price was freedom from your endless, insulting calculations, Thorne. You treat the whole world like a math problem to be solved. Vance may be a fool, but at least he sees the value in chaos. He sees the profit in unmaking what you built." Leyla stepped slightly forward, placing herself near Julian. "You released a temporal echo that aged people on Wall Street, Kellen. That's not chaos. That's uncontained destruction. You jeopardized millions for a man who won't even remember your name a week from now." "Collateral damage," Kellen dismissed, tightening his grip on the rifle. "Drop the case, Doctor. And Thorne, discard your toy." This was the moment of pure instinct. Instead of trying to talk Kellen down or searching for a tactical advantage, Julian did the only thing Kellen wouldn't anticipate. He attacked, not Kellen, but the structural integrity of the corridor itself. Julian fired the kinetic disruptor not at the mole, but at the ceiling $20 feet above them, targeting a weak spot in the ventilation system Leyla had highlighted on the schematic. The blast was not powerful, but focused, a directed sonic impulse that cracked the old concrete and ruptured a high-pressure water pipe. Water erupted violently, mixing with the debris and causing the emergency lights to sputter and die. The corridor plunged into near-total darkness, filled with the roar of pressurized water. Diversion successful. Julian shouted to Leyla over the noise, pushing her toward the main core entrance while drawing Kellen's fire. Kellen, momentarily blinded by the spray and confusion, fired wildly, the energy blasts sizzling as they hit the flooded floor. Julian, moving with a surprising, almost animalistic speed, used the cover of the water and darkness to his advantage. He wasn't a trained fighter, but he was a master of predictive geometry. He calculated Kellen's trajectory and firing angle, not to avoid the shots, but to force Kellen into a predictable, contained defensive posture. Leyla reached the core entrance first. Julian, Kellen is retreating, but he's locking the core behind him. He's buying Vance time. Julian fired a final, focused blast at a conduit box, causing a shower of sparks and a local power outage that momentarily stunned Kellen. The mole, realizing he couldn't stop them, slammed his hand onto a manual override, and a heavy, reinforced steel blast door slid shut between them and the core, Kellen's final act of betrayal. Julian reached the door, breathing heavily, the adrenaline a cold shock in his system. He didn't just lock it, Leyla. He's initiated a 90-second internal purge protocol. If we don't bypass the door, the entire core will be flooded with an inert gas, suffocating anything inside, including Vance and the P1 inch. Leyla's visor displayed the countdown. 1 minute and 25 seconds. He's cleaning up his own mess. He knows Vance is too stupid to disarm the purge. Julian, the door's manual override is keyed to Vance's biometric signature and a temporal encryption key. We can't crack it in time. We don't need to crack it, Julian said, his eyes scanning the intricate digital lockpad. We need to understand how Vance thinks. Vance is all flash. He needs a dramatic entrance. The temporal key isn't a password. It's a temporal sequence, the exact time of the original Manhattan echo. Leyla quickly pulled up the exact nanosecond of the P1 activation. 23:41:03.01897 Zulu time. Julian input the complex sequence with impossible speed, his fingers a blur over the keypad, while Leyla pressed her hand to the biometric scanner, a deliberate decoy, betting that Vance's ego would only require his own key. The steel door hissed, and with 3 seconds left on the purge countdown, it slid open. They stumbled into the central presentation chamber. It was a cavernous, dimly lit space dominated by a massive high-tech conference table where sterlingvance stood, pale and sweaty, flanked by 2 burly, nervous security guards who stared at Julian and Leyla with wide-eyed shock. The P1 prototype sat in the center of the table, connected to a complex array of monitors and power cables. It was glowing faintly, an unsettling, unstable blue light, the same electric blue energy that had flared around Julian and Leyla during the original anomaly. Vance, a man accustomed to projecting bravado, looked thoroughly rattled. His expensive suit was wrinkled, and his slicked-back hair was askew. Thorne, how in God's name did you get in here? Kellen was supposed to. The Manhattan thing was a glitch. Just a demonstration of instability, I told them. He gestured wildly at 2 men in expensive anonymous suits, the buyers. They looked less interested in buying a weapon and more interested in finding the nearest exit. It was no glitch, Vance, Julian said, stepping fully into the room, drawing attention away from Leyla, who immediately began setting down her temporal stabilization unit. It was the P1's default failure mode, triggered by your amateurish activation sequence. You don't have a weapon, Sterling. You have a localized, uncontained temporal decay field that is about to go critical. Critical. Vance scoffed, though his eyes darted nervously to the monitors, which were displaying alarming power fluctuations. I was just about to run a second test. A controlled extraction of data from 1987. Imagine the market advantage. Imagine the second temporal echo, Leyla interjected, working swiftly on the counter-frequency device. The atmosphere is primed from your first attempt. A second ignition will not just cause localized decay, it will initiate a cascading temporal collapse over the eastern seaboard. You'll retire every building, every car, and every person from New York to Miami. You won't sell a weapon, Vance. You'll sell instant extinction. Vance's face went ash-gray. He finally understood that his stolen toy was not a profit center, but a bomb. Yet, his arrogance, the very quality Julian despised, quickly resurfaced. No, I won't, Vance spat, grabbing the P1 unit off the table. He fumbled with the activation console, his fingers shaking. I'll sell the ability to destroy this thing. I'll sell the data on how to stop the decay. I'm still in control. He was bluffing, but he was holding the switch. The buyers, recognizing the sheer lunacy of the situation, bolted for the exit. Vance, panicking, began randomly pressing buttons on the P1 unit, trying to force it into shutdown or worse, a desperate, final ignition. The monitors screamed a high-pitched warning. The unstable P1 unit, reacting to the random input, began to vibrate violently, the electric blue energy flaring dangerously around it, bathing the entire room in a chaotic light. Leyla looked up, her expression one of utter dread. Julian. He's going to trigger it. I need 45 seconds to generate the full-spectrum counter-frequency and deploy the stabilization wave. I need time. Julian looked at Leyla, his eyes conveying a cold, absolute resolve. He had always been a man of calculation, of precise, predictable movements. But now, facing the irreversible, he embraced the chaos of pure instinct. You'll have it, Leyla, Julian said, shedding his diplomatic facade entirely. He dropped his useless kinetic disruptor, knowing a non-lethal weapon was useless against Vance's blind panic. Julian advanced on Vance, not to fight, but to create the ultimate distraction. He was going to put his body between the world and the catastrophe he had created, acting on a rare, beautiful, and necessary break from his calculation. Julian and Leyla were now united, facing the second climax that was rushing toward them like a tidal wave. They were no longer scientists. They were infiltrators, their lives compressed into a countdown of vanishing seconds. The stage was set, a desperate fight in a deep-sea bunker to save causality from a fool and a betrayal. Julian, the chrono-billionaire who hated the limitations of time, was about to spend the most precious seconds of his life buying time for the woman who understood its true value. The central presentation chamber was no longer a negotiation room. It was a collapsing theater of physics. The P1 prototype, gripped by sterlingvance, pulsed with the volatile electric blue energy of the contagion, the residual temporal discharge flaring violently around the device. The high-pitched whine from the console indicated the imminent catastrophic ignition sequence, triggered by Vance's haphazard button mashing. 38 seconds. Julian. I need 38 seconds to lock the synchronization. Leyla shouted, her focus absolute as she worked feverishly on the temporal stabilization unit. She was trying to introduce a counter-frequency, a benevolent temporal push, that had to perfectly match the malevolent temporal pull of the prototype. The calibration required such precision that even a single stray heartbeat could throw the entire sequence off. Julian, having discarded his tactical weapon, advanced on Vance. He was operating on pure instinct, a concept utterly alien to the man who measured his life in predictable algorithms. His goal was not to subdue Vance, but to create the ultimate distraction, to make himself a target so loud and compelling that Vance's panic would be directed solely at him. Sterling. Julian's voice, usually a cold monotone, cracked through the chamber. You sold out Kellen for pocket change. Now you're going to retire the entire eastern seaboard for a 0.00 profit margin. Vance, shaking with terror and adrenaline, fumbled with the P1 unit. No. I'm in control, Thorne. I'm going to destroy this thing. I'm going to. He suddenly lunged toward Julian, not as an aggressive move, but an attempt to clear the path to the main exit, aiming to jettison the volatile prototype into the abyss. Don't move, Vance. Julian commanded, but it was too late. Vance, tripping over a discarded power cable, pitched forward, and the P1 prototype clattered to the floor, sliding precariously close to the main power conduit. 22 seconds. Leyla cried out, Julian, get the prototype away from the power coupling. If it shorts, the temporal field will amplify instantly. Julian lunged. He didn't think about the risk, the proximity of the volatile energy, or the decades of life the contagion could strip from him in a moment. He acted on the uncharacteristic human desire to protect. He tackled Vance not to fight him, but to use the rival's flailing body as a shield. The impact was brutal, sending them both skidding across the concrete floor, but Julian managed to kick the P1 unit away from the power conduit, sending it spinning into the middle of the room. Vance, momentarily stunned, scrambled to retrieve the device. It's mine. You can't take my leverage. Julian didn't engage in the futile wrestling match. He had bought 3.5 seconds. He looked at Leyla, whose face was a mask of intense concentration, her eyes glued to the calibration display. 18 seconds. The P1 prototype was now oscillating violently, the unstable temporal field it generated causing localized, minor anomalies in the room. A metallic filing cabinet 5 feet away suddenly showed massive accelerated rust blooms, the paint peeling away to reveal decades of corrosion in an instant. A strand of Leyla's hair, momentarily exposed to the peripheral field, turned white before receding to its natural color as the immediate energy shifted. Vance grabbed the P1 unit. His panic fully devolved into destructive mania. "I'll retire you, Thorne. I'll retire the whole damn world." He raised the device, intending to smash it against the console, a move that would guarantee a cascading temporal failure. Julian knew he couldn't reach him in time. He calculated the distance, the velocity, and the microseconds remaining. The math was impossible. So he abandoned the math. 10 seconds. He looked past Vance, past the swirling blue energy, and directly at the emergency fire suppression system above Vance's head. Julian picked up a heavy, discarded toolkit from the floor and hurled it with all his strength. It was an impossible, untrained throw, relying purely on the desperation of the moment. The toolkit struck the fire suppression valve with a sickening clang. The bunker's powerful chemical fire retardant system activated instantly, showering Vance and the prototype in a thick, dense, foam-like chemical compound. Vance shrieked, blinded and choking, and dropped the P1 unit into the viscous chemical spray. The compound, designed to instantly smother fire, immediately interfered with the unstable energy field of the prototype, creating a momentary, temporary dampening effect. 3 seconds. The chemical spray bought Leyla the critical moment she needed. Julian, wading through the dense, choking foam, grabbed Vance and threw him against the wall, neutralizing the human threat just as the final countdown hit 0. 0 seconds. Leyla slammed her hand down on the activation sequence. Deployment. The temporal stabilization unit, now fully synchronized, unleashed a controlled burst of energy. It was the complete inverse of the prototype's destructive pull, a benevolent temporal push. This counterfrequency, calibrated to the exact wavelength of the unstable P1 unit, surged across the room. The ensuing energy discharge was immediate and immense. The bunker was bathed in a brilliant, terrifying flash of electric blue energy, far stronger than the residual light they had observed previously. This was the moment of perfect cancellation. The wave of decay, the contagion signature, collided with the wave of stability, the counterfrequency. For a fraction of a second, the room existed outside of normal causality, a perfect temporal zero point. The collision was not an explosion, but an implosion of chaos. The unstable energy field generated by the P1 unit collapsed inward, perfectly neutralizing itself. The device went dark. The high-pitched whine vanished. The electric blue light faded, leaving behind only the sputtering emergency lights and the thick, suffocating foam. Julian and Leyla stood victorious, framed in the lingering, ethereal discharge. Julian was soaked, shaking, breathing heavily, but unharmed. Leyla, equally covered in chemical retardant, stared at the now inert prototype with a mix of relief and profound exhaustion. They had saved the world, not by destroying a weapon, but by mastering the balance of time itself. Julian stumbled over to the console, confirming the reading. The temporal field is flatlining. The atmosphere has restabilized. The P1 is inert. We did it, Leyla. Leyla finally sagged against the console, allowing a small, exhausted smile to break through her concentration. You created the ultimate noise, Julian. And I created the ultimate silence. The sheer audacity of the event, the adrenaline-fueled necessity of their cooperation, had irrevocably shifted their dynamic. The ethical chasm that separated them, Julian's drive for intellectual conquest versus Leyla's drive for humanist growth, had been temporarily, but completely, bridged by a shared moment of absolute terror and triumph. Julian looked at Vance, who was slumped against the wall, defeated, stripped of his stolen leverage. The buyers were gone. The threat was contained. Julian had faced his greatest rival and the ultimate consequence of his obsession, and he had won. He didn't feel the pride of intellectual victory, He felt the simple, profound relief of survival. He walked over to Leyla, the thick foam squishing under his boots. The $text, PEEF_1 unit needs to be retrieved and decommissioned under maximum security. The stabilization unit must be archived. Its data protected from any future misuse. This entire incident, the contagion, the theft, the echo, this second climax, it never happened. It's a secret we share, Leyla. Only us. Leyla nodded, her eyes meeting his. The intensity was still there, but beneath it was a new layer of understanding, a kinship forged in the chaos of causality. She was the one who truly understood the temporal mechanics, and she was the one who had just saved his life and the world from the very forces he had accidentally unleashed. They were bound by this shared world-changing secret. Two solitary giants of intellect united by the need for ultimate discretion. The deep-sea bunker, silent and soaked, became the tomb of the secret of how a billionaire had tried to break time and in doing so, had only discovered its terrifying, inevitable balance. Their next challenge would be the monumental task of securing the most dangerous discovery in history and dealing with the consequences of Kellen's far-reaching betrayal. But for now, they rested in the immediate, beautiful aftermath of success. Julian realized that his 3.7-second future vision had been temporarily blinded by the chaos, yet he had navigated the catastrophe using something far more reliable than calculation. Trust in the one person who challenged his every premise. The cleanup operation at the Vance bunker was executed with the same ruthless precision Julian Thorne applied to financial markets. Within 6 hours of the temporal neutralization, a specialized covert aethelcorp retrieval team, already on standby for the recovery of the P1 unit, arrived. They secured Sterlingvance, who was quickly transported to a high-security, undisclosed Ethel medical facility for psychological evaluation and permanent detention. Vance was not to be handed over to any governmental authority. The sheer existence of the temporal technology, let alone the contagion, was the world's most dangerous secret, and Julian was determined to keep it buried. Julian and Leyla supervised the meticulous recovery of the P1 prototype and, more importantly, the temporal stabilization unit. Both devices were now inert, but the residual energy signatures clinging to the metal were enough to trigger high-level temporal sensors. They watched as the core components were sealed into layered containment fields designed to nullify any lingering temporal pull or push. The entire bunker, now a waterlogged, foam-filled tomb, was marked for intentional demolition and subsequent deep-sea internment. The crime scene was being expertly erased. As the retrieval team worked, Julian and Leyla retreated to a small, isolated command module aboard the Aethelion. The submersible jet was now their temporary, shared sanctuary, a pressurized bubble of quietude and consequence. They were both still damp and smelling faintly of fire retardant and ozone. The structural forensics are complete, Leyla reported, pulling up data on the recovered P1. The prototype is completely decommissioned. The counter-frequency deployment was flawless, Julian. If it had been a single microsecond off, we'd be having this conversation as dust motes. Julian removed his soaked jacket, running a hand over his still damp hair. Your calibration was the variable I couldn't control, Leyla. Yet it was the only variable that mattered. We need to focus on what allowed this breach to happen. Kellen. The mole had vanished during the chaos of the fire suppression system activation, proving he was more than just a security guard. He was a highly trained operative, likely ex-military and deeply compartmentalized. Julian's rage over the betrayal had not cooled. It had solidified into a cold intellectual quest for understanding. I need to know why Vance invested 3 years into him. Vance isn't patient. He's impulsive. What was Kellen's long-term utility? Julian pulled up the financial trace Leyla had initiated earlier. Those unmarked micropayments. They weren't a salary. They were a retainer. Kellen wasn't just feeding Vance Ethel's movements. He was providing him with advanced security architecture and proprietary intelligence. Not about the temporal project, but about our core quantum computing algorithms. Leyla's eyes widened as she connected the dots. Vance wasn't after just the P1. He was trying to get a competitive edge in the quantum market using Ethel's data, and he was positioning Kellen to be his head of security once the P1 was delivered and showcased. The temporal tech was just the spectacular bonus, the wow factor, but the underlying betrayal was economic. A betrayal of the mind, not just the facility, Julian confirmed. Kellen was the living, breathing backdoor into Ethel's financial heart. He saw my obsession with time and used it as his cover. He knew that if I was focused on the cosmic, I'd ignore the terrestrial threat. Julian felt the sting of professional humiliation. He, the man who prided himself on perfect predictive modeling, had been outmaneuvered by a mole with a decade-long plan. "We need to assume Kellen is now active and extremely dangerous," Leyla stated, reviewing his last known coordinates near the bunker. "He knows the depth of the secret, and he's desperate. He'll either try to sell his knowledge to a rogue entity or attempt to extort Vance's assets. He will be dealt with discreetly and permanently," Julian said, the finality in his voice leaving no room for argument. "But the priority is the contagion." The P1 unit was merely the delivery vehicle for the idea of rapid temporal decay. The actual concentrated Chronos Contagion, the accelerated entropy field, is still locked away in the deepest vault of Ethel. This was the source of Julian's true anxiety. The contagion represented the ultimate failure of his ethical framework. He hadn't just created a way to observe the past. He had accidentally created a device that could instantly retire existence. Leyla looked at Julian, her skepticism replaced by a profound, shared concern. "We can't just keep it locked up, Julian. That's a temporary solution to an infinite threat. The very existence of the data, the knowledge of how to create localized temporal pull, is a vulnerability. It's like locking away the blueprints for a nuclear fission bomb but leaving the uranium in the garage." "And what is your proposed solution, Dr. Mbengue?" Julian challenged, his glacial eyes searching hers for the answer. "We erase the data? That's impossible. We're talking about quantum encrypted, distributed datasets across multiple servers, redundant systems." "We don't erase the data," Leyla corrected gently. "We neutralize its potential. We need to introduce the benevolent push, the counter-frequency mechanism, directly into the contagion's core storage unit. We neutralize the pull with the push. We turn the weapon into a perfect equilibrium, making it inert by balancing its catastrophic temporal force with an equal and opposite force." It was a brilliant, almost philosophical solution. Instead of destroying the science, which was impossible, they would neutralize the function. They would turn the chaos into a perfect, contained stability. Julian stared at her for a long moment, the quiet tension in the aethelion thick with unspoken ideas and shared peril. It would require a permanent, real-time calibration of the two opposing forces. It would consume a massive, continuous amount of energy. It would render that part of Ethel a permanently stabilized temporal zero point. "It would be the ultimate firewall, Julian," Leyla insisted. "It would be the proof that we sought not to break time, but to master its balance. It's the only way to secure the world from your genius." Julian finally nodded, the rare admission of a catastrophic failure and the acceptance of a necessary, complex solution. "It begins immediately. We divert 50% of Ethel's power grid to the contagion containment vault. You will design the system. I will implement the security. This is Project Chronos's final iteration. Projectstasis." He looked at Leyla, not as a colleague or a counterweight, but as the indispensable partner in this silent war. The shared ordeal in the bunker had stripped away their professional distance, exposing a vulnerable interdependence. Julian, the man who despised linear existence, was now relying completely on the consistent, steady presence of the woman whose humanism challenged his cold logic. "One final thing, Julian," Leyla said softly, breaking the technical discussion. "The people in Manhattan, the ones who experienced the aging echo, their lives are fundamentally altered. They have decades of decay in their cells. Their bodies were exposed to a temporal shockwave." Julian looked away, out at the dark ocean, acknowledging the human cost of his ambition. "Ethel will manage the consequences. A bespoke, highly specialized medical team will be dispatched. Their records will be redacted, their treatments masked as rare, rapidly advancing geriatric conditions. We will give them back the health that I stole from them, 1 second at a time." The weight of this consequence, the realization that his pursuit of intellectual conquest had real, irreversible human cost, finally settled over Julian. He had sought to control the universe, and instead, He had been forced to confront his own profound, terrifying capacity for error. He and Leyla, united by a secret that could end the world, were now embarking on a new, quiet mission. Not to conquer time, but to silently maintain its fragile, predictable flow. The aftermath of the temporal echo in Manhattan was quickly contained and surgically managed. Julian Thorne poured his vast resources and calculated focus into two parallel immediate operations: projectstasis, the neutralization of the Chronos Contagion, and the clandestine hunt for Kellen, the traitor who carried the knowledge of the temporal breach. The aethelcorp deep sub-basement complex, a vast, subterranean fortress beneath the firm's headquarters, transformed into the operational center for projectstasis. This was where the actual concentrated contagion, the stable field of accelerated entropy, was stored, isolated in a vault built of materials that had to be replaced every 6 months due to the subtle temporal decay it inflicted. Julian and Leyla spent the next 4 days existing solely within this complex, fueled by high-octane coffee and the shared, terrifying certainty of their task. They had rerouted 50% of Ethel's global power grid, an unprecedented drain, to the vault. This energy was needed not to destroy the contagion, but to power the constant, microscopic calibration required for the temporal stabilization unit. "The principle of stasis is beautiful, Julian," Leyla observed, adjusting a sensor array deep within the containment vault. The air around the core storage unit shimmered with the intense, suppressed energy of the contagion, a faint, menacing purple glow. "We're not destroying the pull of the contagion. We're giving it an equal, constant push. It's the perfect equilibrium, turning a catastrophic force into an eternal, contained 0 point." The task was physically and intellectually grueling. Leyla's design required the temporal stabilization unit, now permanently integrated into the vault structure, to constantly monitor the contagion's unique decay signature and generate a counter-frequency that matched it precisely, down to the $10 raise to the power of -12 decimal place. Any fluctuation, any power spike or dip, would cause the contagion to momentarily win, resulting in catastrophic decay within the vault, possibly aging the entire floor of the basement to bedrock. Julian managed the engineering and energy systems. His ability to calculate complex, multivariable logistical problems was legendary, but even he found the continuous strain taxing. He worked side by side with Leyla, monitoring the core's output. He saw her dedication, her fierce ethical resolve that demanded not just a temporary fix, but a permanent, responsible solution. "The power consumption is steady," Julian reported, his eyes glued to the energy diagnostics. "We've created a permanent, stable eddy in the flow of time here. We've turned chaos into a constant. The Chronos Contagion is inert. And the knowledge of how to create localized temporal pull is effectively neutralized," Leyla added, stepping back, wiping a bead of sweat from her brow. "It's our ultimate firewall, Julian. The weapon is now the defense." Projectstasis was complete. The most dangerous discovery in human history was now locked in a perpetual stalemate, consuming half of Julian Thorne's energy empire to maintain the world's linear sanity. With the physical threat contained, Julian turned his full, frigid attention to the human variable. Kellen, the former security chief, was not just a traitor. He was an unacceptable loose end. He knew too much about Ethel's deepest secrets, the contagion's existence, Vance's operation, and critically, Leyla's unique involvement and capabilities. Julian had activated his own separate clandestine network, a small team of former intelligence operatives loyal only to him, for the sole purpose of finding Kellen. He treated the hunt as a problem of behavioral prediction, relying on data points instead of intuition. "Kellen's movements are nonlinear," Julian stated, reviewing a dynamic projection of Kellen's potential flight paths. The mole had initially vanished near the coast of New Jersey. He's not heading for a secure bolt hole. He's running a digital ghost profile. He's drawing on deep compartmentalized training. Leyla, now back in the central Ethel headquarters, continued to support the trace, focusing on Kellen's digital shadow. He was a long-term asset, Julian. Vance's financial payments weren't just cash. They were also access codes to an established, deep web infrastructure. Kellen has the resources to disappear for years. "He won't," Julian countered, leaning over the holographic map. Kellen's betrayal wasn't just about the money. It was about the contempt he felt for Ethel and me. He wants to prove he was smarter. He wants an audience. He will resurface to monetize his knowledge. The intelligence began to coalesce around a single pattern. Kellen was trying to establish contact with known global intelligence brokers, rogue nations and deep-pocketed conglomerates constantly seeking military-grade advantages. He was offering the conceptual framework of the P1 prototype, the methodology for localized temporal harvesting, in exchange for a massive guaranteed escape route and permanent financial security. He's aiming for Vienna, Julian identified, pointing to a hub of international, high-level, unregulated technology exchange. He knows the risks of remaining in the United States. He's planning a final transaction with a known entity called the Syndicate, a group specializing in reverse engineering stolen intellectual property. Julian looked at Leyla. The complexity of the operation required a coordination that went far beyond professional necessity. They had to travel together, blending Ethel's immense technological power with their unique knowledge of temporal physics. "We have to intercept him before he makes the sale," Leyla agreed, her expression resolute. "If the Syndicate gets even the framework, they'll be able to replicate a rudimentary $text for $1 and start causing global temporal instability. We'll have solved stasis only to face 1,000 unlocalized echoes." Julian, for the first time in his calculated life, felt a strong human connection to the danger they shared. The silence in the aftermath of stasis had amplified the tension between them, a tension born of mutual respect and survival. "I will handle the interception, Leyla," Julian said. "You must remain here. Your presence is the insurance policy for stasis. Only you understand the calibration frequency. If I am compromised, or if the energy fluctuates, the world needs you here." Leyla stared back, the skepticism momentarily returning, now tinged with genuine fear for his safety. "You rely on calculation, Julian. Kellen knows your every calculation. You said yourself, he anticipates your moves. You need a variable he can't predict." "Then I will bring one he won't expect," Julian stated, his eyes hardening with a cold, terrifying determination. He accessed a highly encrypted folder on his personal console, data he had kept hidden even from Leyla. "I learned one thing from Kellen's betrayal. Never trust the existing framework. I designed a countermeasure to Kellen 3 years ago, a piece of preemptive data control. I just never deployed it. Until now." The mission to Vienna was not just a capture. It was the final confrontation with the failure of trust that had nearly destroyed Julian's world. He was going to eliminate the human variable who had exposed the fragility of his control, using a calculation so deeply personal and hidden that even Kellen, the expert mole, could not have anticipated it. Julian Thorne was going to Vienna, and he was taking no chances. The world was safe for now, held in the perfect energy-draining embrace of stasis, but the lingering thread of knowledge, carried by one desperate man, still haunted the edges of their fragile temporal balance. Vienna, city of imperial elegance and quiet espionage, served as the neutral, opulent backdrop for the final confrontation. Kellen had chosen the city's unregulated financial hubs for his transaction with the Syndicate, betting on the anonymity of old European money. Julian Thorne, traveling under a complex set of layered identities, arrived via a private, unlogged flight, carrying nothing but a slim, customized data drive, the hardware container for his preemptive countermeasure. Julian had adhered to Leyla's caution and traveled alone, relying only on his own intellect and his highly isolated clandestine network for real-time intelligence. He was acutely aware that Kellen, the seasoned mole, knew Julian's operational profile intimately. The reliance on logic, the aversion to physical risk, and the belief in the power of data. Julian had to become the very thing Kellen couldn't anticipate: unpredictable. The meeting was scheduled to take place in a heavily secured, privately rented floor of a Baroque building overlooking the Danube. Kellen had demanded an untraceable, non-digital exchange, a physical handover of the conceptual framework data for the P1 temporal harvesting methodology. Julian's intelligence network confirmed that the Syndicate's representative was a ruthless operative known only as the Archivist, whose reputation was built on eliminating witnesses post-transaction. Julian, dressed in a custom-made suit that served as a subtle sensory camouflage, took up a vantage point 2 blocks from the exchange location. He established a secure, satellite-linked comms channel with his network, feeding him a real-time, three-dimensional mapping of the target building's interior and its immediate surroundings. Kellen is inside, 40 feet from the main vault, the voice of Julian's lead operative, a former MI6 asset named Elias, whispered through the earpiece. 3 security teams confirmed. High-level counter-surveillance active. The archivist is en route. Julian didn't look at the external threats. He focused entirely on Kellen's digital ghost profile. Reroute my digital identity. I need to be visible to Kellen's localized network. Not as Julian Thorne, but as Ethel Security Command, Tier 1 override. Elias hesitated. That's exposing your signature, sir. Kellen will know you're here. Precisely, Julian confirmed. Kellen expects stealth. I'm giving him a declaration of war. I want him panicked, focused on the immediate threat of Ethel's direct intervention, not on the true nature of my attack. As Julian's false signature pinged Kellen's network inside the building, the mole reacted instantly. Kellen knew that the presence of the Tier 1 override meant Ethel was not just interested in retrieval. They were interested in permanent data suppression, likely via physical destruction. Julian watched the thermal imaging. Kellen, now visibly agitated, pulled the archivist aside. The transaction was being rushed. This was Julian's opening. The slim data drive in Julian's pocket contained the culmination of his fear of internal betrayal. A highly advanced, bespoke piece of code he called Temporal Integrity Enforcer TIE. Julian hadn't designed it to fight. He had designed it to invalidate knowledge. The TIE code was structured as an invisible, self-propagating quantum virus. Its function was not to delete data, but to subtly, permanently corrupt the fundamental integrity of any data related to Ethel's core temporal algorithms. If exposed to the stolen framework data, the conceptual math required to build a temporal harvesting device, the TIE virus would introduce tiny, mathematically insignificant errors into the system, errors that would grow exponentially once the recipient tried to replicate the technology. Targeting Kellen's secure transaction network now, Julian instructed Elias, initiating the injection sequence. He didn't need to physically enter the building. He used his quantum-linked satellite array to bypass Vienna's standard encryption layers, injecting the TIE virus into the local network through a targeted, high-frequency signal burst. The TIE virus was invisible, undetectable by any conventional cybersecurity measure. It settled into Kellen's system, waiting for the transfer. Julian didn't wait. He moved toward the building, executing the diversion he had prepared. He triggered a localized non-destructive EMP burst 2 blocks away, instantly crippling the power grid in a 3-block radius, plunging the Baroque street into sudden darkness. The alarm system in Kellen's building immediately switched to emergency power, and the security lights flickered. This wasn't a tactical maneuver. It was a psychological one. Kellen expected Ethel to attack data. Julian was attacking infrastructure, forcing the transaction to occur in panic and confusion. Julian made his entrance through the main service entrance, his demeanor now one of controlled intellectual menace. He found Kellen and the archivist huddled around the transfer terminal, surrounded by 3 nervous security guards, illuminated by the red glow of emergency lighting. Kellen looked up, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and twisted vindication. Thorne, you should have stayed with your precious stasis. You can't stop the sale. The data is queued. Julian didn't acknowledge the archivist, focusing solely on the man who had betrayed him. The data you stole is an incomplete blueprint, Kellen. It's a recipe for a catastrophic failure, as demonstrated by the Wall Street Echo. You're selling them a liability, not a weapon. It's a start, Kellen shouted, slamming his hand on the transfer button. The sale is complete. The syndicate has the core framework. Now you lose. A green light flashed on the terminal, confirming the transfer of the stolen temporal framework data to the archivist's secure ledger. Julian paused, a slight, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. He hadn't stopped the sale, but he had allowed the corruption to transfer. No, Kellen, Julian stated, his voice dangerously soft. The sale is complete. And the corruption is complete. My preemptive countermeasure has been active in your system since you initiated the transfer. That data you just sold is a poison pill. It contains mathematically insignificant, uncorrectable errors. errors that will compound exponentially when the syndicate attempts to replicate the harvesting process. Kellen's bravado dissolved into raw terror. "You're lying." Vance's security scan showed no anomalies. Vance's security relies on detection. "My code relies on subversion," Julian explained, enjoying the moment of pure intellectual victory. "The syndicate will spend billions trying to build the technology, only to have their temporal echoes turn into localized, absurd failures. They won't know why, and they won't know where the flaw originated. I didn't stop the sale. I invalidated the knowledge itself." The archivist, a sharp-featured woman in an impeccable gray suit, finally spoke, her voice cold and lethal. "Incomplete knowledge is still knowledge, Thorne. And you, as the source of the invalidation, are still a loose end." She signaled her guards. But before they could move, Julian tapped the data drive in his pocket. He didn't need to fight. He had already engineered the retreat. The integrity of the syndicate's entire financial ledger, accessible through the network Kellen utilized, is now linked to a temporal flux trigger in this drive, Julian stated. "Pure bluff, pure calculation. If I don't disarm the trigger, the flux will initiate a localized, constant temporal decay field within their core database, not aging people, but aging data, turning their billions into irrelevant, archaic records." The archivist, a master of risk management, immediately recognized the high-stakes possibility, even if the technology was science fiction. The threat to her company's data integrity was existential. "Kellen is yours," she declared, stepping back, her previous intention to eliminate Julian instantly reversed by the threat to her assets. "The transaction is void. Do not, under any circumstances, trigger that flux." Kellen screamed. "You betrayed me. You worthless cowards." Julian, the master of causality, had used a weapon that didn't age armies or corrode bridges. He had weaponized the fragility of information. His cold calculation had finally yielded the perfect victory. Julian seized Kellen and, with the terrifying efficiency of his clandestine network, exfiltrated him from Vienna within the hour. The mission was successful. The threat of the stolen knowledge was nullified. Julian had faced his greatest betrayal and solved it, not with force, but with the ruthless application of his superior intellect, securing the temporal balance and ensuring the lasting peace of projectstasis. He knew that Leyla, the conscience of his work, would approve of the outcome. The knowledge was neutralized, and the world was safe for now to continue its slow, linear, beautifully inefficient existence. The return trip from Vienna was conducted with the same cold efficiency as the infiltration. Kellen, subdued and demoralized, was secured aboard the Aethelion. Julian Thorne, however, was not preoccupied with the logistics of his captive. His focus was entirely internal, reviewing the cost of his victory. He had defeated the threat of global temporal collapse, but only by descending into the realm of human volatility and strategic deceit, utilizing instinct and leverage instead of pure calculation. Upon arrival back at the aethelcorp complex, Kellen was immediately transferred to a custom-built, highly isolated containment cell. Julian insisted on handling the interrogation personally. Leyla Mbengue, having successfully maintained the projectstasis equilibrium in his absence, met Julian at the vault entrance. The faint, steady pulse of energy from the stasis core, the perfect contained 0 point, hummed softly around them. "The equilibrium held perfectly," Leyla reported, her voice laced with relief and fatigue. "The counter-frequency never wavered. We are stable. And the knowledge is poisoned," Julian confirmed, handing her the now-inert data drive. The TIE virus worked. The syndicate received a blueprint for catastrophic failure, rendering the stolen information worse than useless. "The threat is neutralized, Leyla, but the betrayal must be understood." Leyla could see the toll the ordeal had taken on Julian. The glacial detachment in his eyes was fractured, replaced by a weary humanity. "I told you he would anticipate your calculations, Julian. You had to become something else." "I had to become predictable only in my fury," Julian admitted, a rare moment of introspection. "I needed him to believe I was chasing a dataset, when in reality, I was engineering the invalidation of that dataset. It was messy. It was inefficient. It relied on a high degree of bluff. It relied on human leverage," Leyla corrected, looking at him with a penetrating gaze. You leveraged the archivist's fear of data decay. You won because you understood that even billionaires fear the erosion of their records more than they fear physical threat. Julian nodded, accepting her critique. I need to understand Kellen's pathology. Why a 10-year career, only to sell out for a fractional return? The raw data doesn't support the betrayal. Julian entered the containment cell alone. Kellen sat at a sterile table, his eyes darting, his previous defiance replaced by a sullen exhaustion. Vance didn't pay you enough, Kellen, Julian began, his voice devoid of emotion, operating now as a perfect analytical machine. Your retainer was a fraction of your value to Ethel. Why the long con? Why the systemic risk? Kellen finally looked up, his voice brittle. It wasn't about the money, Thorne. It was about the insult. You look through me every day. You look through everyone. You treated the entire linear flow of human existence as a primitive bottleneck. Your words. You are so obsessed with the abstract concept of time that you fail to see the value in a single, well-lived human second. The answer hit Julian with unexpected force. Kellen wasn't motivated by avarice. He was motivated by a deep-seated resentment of Julian's intellectual contempt for ordinary life. I spent 10 years guaranteeing the security of a man who believed my entire life was an algebraic error, Kellen continued, a bitter passion rising in his voice. Vance, for all his idiocy, promised me relevance. He promised me a seat at the table, not just a place guarding the door. I wanted to show you the chaos you missed when you were staring 3.7 seconds into the future. Julian processed the information. The betrayal was an act of emotional causality, not financial. Kellen wanted to break Julian's perfect, predictable world just as Julian wanted to break time. You created the vulnerability, Julian concluded, the glacial melt returning to his eyes, now colder than ever. You were not a mole. You were a philosophical counterpoint. You are now contained. Kellen. You will live out your life in total isolation. Your betrayal will never be revealed, and your philosophical victory will never be acknowledged. You will live in the silence you sought to shatter. Julian left the cell, the weight of the realization settling over him. His greatest flaw wasn't a technical error or a security vulnerability. It was his disregard for human consequence and emotion. Kellen's revenge was the cost of Julian's arrogance. Julian immediately sought out Leyla. He found her in the stasis vault, monitoring the constant balance of the core. The low, steady hum of the perfectly contained chaos was the sound of their mutual success. Kellen's motivation was personal, Julian told her, recounting the interrogation with a detached precision. He was reacting to my contempt for the linear nature of his life. He wanted to be the unpredictable variable. Leyla didn't seem surprised. You can calculate the trajectory of an electron, Julian, but you can't calculate the weight of a grudge. That's the difference between physics and humanity. The knowledge is contained, Julian said, gesturing to the core. The contagion is inert. Vance is neutralized. Kellen is secured. The balance is restored, but it demands constant vigilance. It demands a covenant, Leyla corrected, turning to face him. The electric blue remnants of the temporal energy occasionally flickered on her face, illuminating her resolute expression. We saved the world, Julian. But we are the only two people alive who know how close we came to instant retirement. We are bound by this secret, and by the knowledge of how easily your genius can become the world's undoing. Julian looked at her, his eyes finally meeting hers without the filter of calculation. He saw not a colleague or an ethical challenge, but a partner forged in the crucible of temporal chaos. He saw the rare quality he had spent his life ignoring: humanist depth and unwavering commitment to growth. Projectstasis is not just an engineering marvel, Leyla, Julian said, his voice dropping to a rare personal level. It's the ultimate ethical contract. I cannot maintain this balance without your oversight. Your vision for containment and equilibrium is the true genius of stasis. I need you to be the permanent curator of this knowledge, and the permanent conscience of aethelcorp. He wasn't offering her a job. He was offering her a shared existence. The constant, silent threat of the contagion, the sheer effort required to maintain the 0 point, was the invisible chain that bound them. Leyla stepped closer, the low hum of the core providing the only sound. The pursuit of mastering time forced you to confront the one thing you never calculated for, Julian: trust. Trust is inefficient, but necessary. It requires a shared belief in the value of the present moment. In that moment, Julian Thorne, the man who abhorred linear time, recognized the sublime value of the present. He realized his pursuit to break time had resulted in him finally understanding it, not as a mathematical sequence, but as a fragile, precious, and shared experience. He hadn't broken time. Time had broken his arrogance. They stood in the perfect silence of the stasis core, two disparate forces now in perfect, powerful equilibrium. They were bound by a catastrophe, but they were also bound by an unspoken, shared victory. A victory not over physics, but over their own limitations. Their relationship, forged in the terror of the temporal echo, had settled into an undeniable, necessary partnership. Julian knew that the Chronos Contagion would remain the silent, persistent threat, demanding constant, shared attention. He would forever be the engineer of infinity, and Leyla would be the curator of its ultimate balance. Their life was no longer life's drama with no rehearsal, but a shared low-frequency hum of eternal vigilance. 2 years passed in the silent, linear, and meticulously maintained flow of time that Julian Thorne once despised. The world continued its slow, beautiful inefficiency, utterly oblivious to the temporal war that had been fought and won beneath the streets of Manhattan. The Manhattan aging echo was dismissed publicly as a series of complex infrastructure failures coupled with mass psychological stress, a testament to Ethel's unparalleled capacity for informational control. Sterlingvance remained permanently detained, his memory and mind neutralized by specialized Ethel protocols, effectively retiring him from existence. Kellen, the philosophical counterpoint, lived out his silence in an Ethel facility in the Arctic, his betrayal a secret known only to two. Julian Thorne, the chrono-billionaire, was fundamentally changed. He still wore the perfectly tailored suits and still projected the calculated intensity of a man looking 3.7 seconds ahead, but the glacial melt in his eyes now contained a different kind of light, the quiet, fierce acknowledgement of human causality. He had learned that the most profound challenges were not technical or abstract, but ethical and emotional. The true center of Julian's world was no longer the penthouse office, but the deep sub-basement vault, the location of projectstasis. The stasis vault had become a technological temple. It required continuous, dedicated monitoring, consuming massive energy but demanding absolute quietude. The core was now an almost philosophical construct, a permanent, stable eddy in the flow of time, where the Chronos Contagion's pull was held in perpetual equilibrium by Leyla's benevolent temporal push. The low, steady hum was the sound of the universe not ending. Dr. Leyla Mbengue was now officially Ethel's Chief Ethics and Temporal Integrity Officer, a title created specifically for her by Julian. She retained full control over the stasis core and the entirety of Ethel's Temporal Research Division. Her presence in the company had permanently tilted the firm's focus away from pure intellectual conquest and toward responsible innovation and humanist security. Their relationship had settled into a profoundly complex and interdependent equilibrium, mirroring the stasis core itself. They were constant intellectual sparring partners, challenging each other's assumptions with a raw honesty only shared trauma could forge. They rarely spoke of the contagion or the theft, but the shared secret was the bedrock of their interaction. One frigid afternoon, Julian found Leyla in the vault. She was reviewing the long-term energy flux data, her face illuminated by the steady, contained purple-blue light of the core. The core stability is 99.999999999%, Leyla reported, without looking up. The decay signature has not shifted by a single picojoule in 17 months. The containment is functionally eternal, Julian, provided we maintain the energy supply. The energy supply is non-negotiable, Julian replied, his voice firm. We diverted the entire profits of the Q3 quantum division into long-term power generation. Stasis is the central dogma of aethelcorp now. Profit is secondary to stability. He walked closer, noting the subtle weariness around her eyes. You spend too much time here, Leyla. The stability of the world is not meant to be borne by one person. Leyla finally looked up, her expression a mix of gratitude and challenge. It's borne by two, Julian. And the core requires vigilance. The moment we become complacent, the moment we stop respecting the power of that contained chaos, is the moment the equilibrium fails. She gestured toward the containment core, where the two opposing temporal forces met in silent, perpetual opposition. This isn't just technology, Julian. This is a covenant. We are bound by the knowledge that we can end the world, and by the shared obsessive need to ensure we never do. Our entire relationship is built on this shared necessity. Julian understood. Their partnership wasn't born of romance or shared ambition in the conventional sense. It was born of mutual necessity for survival. She was the only person who truly understood his genius, and he was the only person who could guarantee the global resources required for her ethical vision. The ultimate irony, Julian murmured, allowing a trace of humor. My attempt to break time resulted in the most profound stability of my life. I sought to escape the limitations of the present, and instead, I am permanently anchored to it and to you. He hadn't found the secret to infinite wealth or ultimate power, but he had discovered the true terrifying fragility of existence, and the profound importance of the linear, 1 second at a time commitment he shared with Leyla to protect it. He had learned to value the slow, inefficient flow of time, the very thing he had once labeled an insult. Julian made a decisive move, one that broke with his past, calculated self. He reached into his coat and produced a small, exquisitely crafted object, a clock. It was not digital or quantum, but a classic, heavy pendulum clock, its face etched with complex, non-repeating mathematical sequences. I had this commissioned, Julian explained, holding it out to her. It is engineered to keep time with absolute, perfect, zero-variance accuracy. It is a symbol of my new respect for linearity. And the equations etched on the face. They are the stabilization coefficients you derived for projectstasis. Leyla took the clock, her expression softening. She traced the etched numbers, the silent language of their shared crisis. A beautiful machine, she observed. But you know, Julian, the beauty of time isn't in its perfection. It's in its imperfection. The occasional error, the slight delay, the unpredictable moment, that's what makes it human. Then let this be the symbol of the perfect balance we maintain, Julian countered gently. The perfect equilibrium between my absolute certainty and your human chaos. He had not found love, but something far rarer and more potent, a shared existential purpose. They were the guardians of the world's most dangerous secret, bound by the constant hum of a perpetual zero point. The only way forward was together, shoulder to shoulder, maintaining the fragile balance of existence. Julian Thorne, the billionaire who tried to break time, had finally found peace, not in conquest, but in covenant, a partnership as stable and eternal as the stasis core itself. The world remained safe, governed by the silent, steady beat of the linear flow, and beneath it all Julian and Leyla stood in the hum of their magnificent, terrifying secret, forever bound by the cost of causality. They had not defeated time. They had learned to respect it. Thanks so much for reading How a Billionaire Tried to Break Time. If Julian and Leyla's race against causality kept you hooked, please like this post and subscribe to be the first to read my next story. I love hearing your thoughts on the ending, so drop a comment below.